Now, since the main task of the DVS is to unmask, we thought we might play a little bit of fun and do a bit of unmasking tonight ourselves by including a mystery guest. He is a writer, actor, director, teacher, coach, a great expert on Shakespeare, and of course, a committed Oxfordian, and someone who is utterly beloved of all those who come under his spell, his delightful and instructive influence. I saw a performance he directed and performed in of As You Like It in the shade of the great keep at Hedingham Castle, and I have to say it was one of the most enjoyable Shakespeare comedies I have ever watched. He is, of course, Ron Destro.
Is she to be buried in Christian burial that willfully seeks her own salvation? How could that be? Unless she drowned herself in her own defense. It must be, say, offendendo. It cannot be else. For here lies the point. If I drown myself wittingly, it argues an act. And an act has three branches. It is to act, to do, to perform. Our gal, she drowned herself wittingly. I'll explain that in a minute. Thank you very much. I want to let you know I'm very honored to have been invited here and to follow the great Alexander Waugh and the wonderful Sir Derek Jacobi. As an Oxfordian actor and director, there's a telling story that I should mention. In 2008, I was about to begin what turned out to be 10 years of private study with John Barton. And I was with Sir Derek the day before. We were doing a master class in London. And he knew I was going to see John the next morning. So he said, whatever you do, don't tell John that you are an Oxfordian. I said, oh, no, I don't tell anybody that. You know, in those days, we all, except for Sir Derek, we were in the closet about letting people know that, because we could be and still are ostracized for being Oxfordian. So the next day, I went to meet with John, and the first thing he said, because I had created the Oxford Shakespeare Company, and he said, well, Oxford, what is the Oxford in the Oxford Shakespeare Company? And I said, well, Derek Jacobi told me not to tell you, but I'm an Oxfordian. And he said, oh, it doesn't matter, it's all right. So, but John was rare in that. I have been ostracized among Shakespeare professionals. So a group of anti-Oxfordians tried to stop our performance of Henry V on the battlefield of Agincourt a few years ago. But we mushed on once more onto the breach when we did perform. But the question that always comes up is, does knowing who the author is affect the actor? And I've talked to Sir Derek about it. I've talked to Michael York about it, and Jeremy Irons. And the consensus seems to be, no, it doesn't really affect it in terms of the fact that we are actors who are playing a character, pursuing objectives within a certain context of the play. So while we're doing it, we're not thinking of who the author is, and we're thinking of what the character wants. But when I did The Gravedigger recently in Elsinore, my concern when I was performing was to get that grave dug. However, knowing who the author was helped to clarify things for me. Why is The Gravedigger echoing the Hales v. Pettit legal case? Well, an actor always has to ask why. What is I need to know what my role is, my function in the play. And I look up the case as an actor. Any actor can look it up and say, if you have an Arden and it has the notes in it, and you say, oh, okay, it has to do with this Hales versus Pettit case. But then you still say, well, why? What relevance does that have to me bringing this up as a gravedigger? And so, why is Hamlet obsessed with his lost inheritance? as the great Tom Renier wrote about. He seems to be more obsessed with that than with ruling Denmark, which is not in the play, this idea of the crown, as much as his inheritance, what he's lost. So at any rate, there's nothing in the play to help us. But if we know how the play is related to Oxford's lost inheritance, then it clarifies and it helps us as an actor. If you take All's Well That Ends Well, it's a problem play because the ending, Bertram accepts Helen at the end. If she, my liege, can make me know this clearly, I'll love her dearly, ever, ever dearly. Well, it's confusing for an actor to say, well, he obviously doesn't love her. Why the sudden switch at the end? And it becomes problematic. But knowing about De Vere and all the autobiographical elements of the play, the youth who's made ward of the crown, the escape to Italy, an elevated title, a forced marriage, a reluctant groom, a bed trick, knowing how things did not work out for Edward and Anne, then it suddenly is all clarified for the actor and for the director. Every time I direct the play, I have Bertram saying, yes, I will love her ever, ever dearly. And he sort of motions for Helena to go off, follow the king and the entourage. And as soon as they're off, he doesn't follow her, he follows Diana, who goes off the other way. And that helps to clarify for the audience that this is an ironic ending, which I think it is, based on what I've discovered about the author. So knowing who the playwright is clarifies, and it solves the problems. You have difficult passages, you have apparent dichotomies, strange motivations, and that is all helped by knowing who the author is. Why are Oberon and Titania fighting over a changeling boy? They could be arguing about anything. But where does this boy come from? And it kind of echoes what's in the sonnets. And so, out alack, he was but 1 hour mine. And Alexander points to the loss of Lord Bulbeck. And if you subscribe to the PT theory, then there's another loss of a son. So it's all helpful, useful information. Every character is the author's voice, I think, no matter what. He or she reveals himself or herself in every character. I think every writer does this. So if you think the Stratford man wrote the plays, you have the wrong perspective. And as an actor, you may be elevating the commoner more than was intended, or you may be denigrating noblemen or the king more than is appropriate. I think you won't get the parody if you have the wrong author, and that's why it's important. An actor can discover the inside joke if you're playing Malvolio and you read The Fortunate Unhappy. And then you can look it up and find out, well, that was Christopher Hatton's Nom de Plume. But again, why is the Stratford man skewering Sir Christopher Hatton? Doesn't make any sense. But if you understand who the author is, suddenly it's possible for him to be lampooning Hatton and Burleigh and Leicester and not having his head chopped off. And there are ulterior motives for it. So, and the last thing is it adds resonance to know who wrote this. It makes it personal. The Oxford Shakespeare Company, we do these overseas workshops in Europe and England, and we do the plays in their original location. So we did Hamlet behind Castle Elsinore. We did The Merchant of Venice in Villa Foscari. We did Richard II at Flint Castle, Wales, where the historic Richard gave up his crown. We've done Henry V on the battlefield of Agincourt, where there are still thousands of bodies buried in unknown trenches in the earth below. We did Richard III on Bosworth Field, where he was killed. In Macbeth, we often do in front of Birnam Oak, which is a tree that stood there during the true reign of Macbeth. So when we do that, something magical happens when we know we're playing real people, real events, slightly modified, of course, but this really happened to real people on this same ground. And there's something very magical about reenacting this material where it happened. And it becomes more than a play. It's bigger than a play. Added to that, the events of the author's own life, and then it's very, very significant. And it gives you, as an actor, it gives you more confidence, I think, to go out and do what you're doing. There's an added depth. It's like, people always say, it's like knowing that Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible as a response to the 1950s political witch hunts, or Oedipus at Colonus perhaps mirrored, some people say, Sophocles' relationship with his daughter and his sons. And so there's an added poignance to it. Greatest voice in rock and roll, Steve Perry from Journey. Steve recently came out with an album after 22 years of doing nothing, no music at all. And an album called Traces. And he writes, it's a song. If you're a singer and you find the song and you read these lyrics, I never knew, I never tried to feel the pain you've held inside. Now you're gone, it's too late to reach for you. And though we're miles apart, you belong to me. Well, it may sound like, well, they've split up and she moved to California, whatever, and they're miles apart. But if you know the true story, that it's about a woman that he fell in love with and died, it becomes more meaningful. Glenn Campbell's I'm Not Gonna Miss You, where he says, you're the last person I will love, you're the last face I will recall, and best of all, I'm not gonna miss you. How do you interpret that? Well, if you know that he wrote that after he discovered he had Alzheimer's, it has a different poignancy. So anyway, that I'm very happy to share that with you and give you the perspective of the actor and the director. And it's very useful for me, but whenever I start a workshop with actors, I always say, I tell them what I think in the play comes from Oxford's real life. And then I say, look, this is not a cult. You don't have to join it. That's okay. You don't have to believe it. But I think it's helpful to know this. And many, many young actors now are coming around and saying, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that's what I wanted to tell you. And if apparently people are afraid that Ian's book is going to run out. There's still plenty of copies of my book around, just so you know that. Shameless plug. Anyway, now that I'm finished,